to answer questions. So thanks for having me here, and it's great to see so many people I know on the call and lots of others I hope to know better over time. Peter, that was impressive summary of the mentee. I think you're missing a career in, like, I don't know, football commentary or something. There's a role there that you're pretty good at the current thing. Anyway, so I'm Helen Adams. I work at KCL, but I'm leading the Maximising UK Adaptation to Climate Change Hub, which is part of UKRI and DEFRA funded MAC program, right? So there's us, we're a hub, £5 million, and there are now £2 million. They've sort of been announced kind of softly, I think, £2 million research grants also on the doing of adaptation. And so this call was kind of put together by DEFRA to sort of fill the gap between CCRA and the kind of understanding of the risks and the National Adaptation Programme, the doing. And probably in response to the fact it got completely slated when it came out, the last National Adaptation Plan, which I've said to DEFRA to their face. So I'll say, I'm okay saying that to you guys. And so I've just put this here as a reminder, and I'll share the slides with you guys for circulation. We have made a Google form to start developing an external mailing list so that we can keep you up to date, because we're starting to spin up with things like the website and with what we'll talk to you about in a bit, kind of calls for input, like we're going out for wider consultation on things. So what are we about? I mean, really, we're a knowledge exchange and synthesis hub. That's what we're here for. We're not here to generate knowledge. We're here to collect knowledge on doing adaptation. Our USP as a hub is that we are focusing on, no, we haven't settled, here's a discussion for you on transformational versus transformative adaptation, but we're focusing on transformational adaptation, right? So we want, and that to me is adaptation, my definition of it is that it addresses underlying vulnerability. So it's adaptation that engages with power dynamics, right? We're not happy with business as usual. And part of that is that we really want to build towards a kind of a more aspirational vision of a well-adapted UK. Now, these are our objectives. We're going through a bit of a process at the moment, but really we're about structural factors. So you won't see any sectors when we talk about the hub. We're not engaging in particular sectors. We will have to eventually, but we're sort of multi-sectoral, cascading risks, and thinking systemically. So really our 5 kind of areas we're working in are assessing barriers to awareness and engagement on adaptation. So who's not even thinking about this and how do we get them thinking about this? We're really about leveraging and piggybacking on existing mechanisms. So for example, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales is super, it's got loads of potential in this space that's really been underdeveloped. We're really about systems complexity and systems thinking, because you're not going to do anything transformational without taking a systems approach. I just got a bit of challenge. I gave this talk about 2 hours ago, and I suppose you could call number 4 governance, but it's also, so it's governance writ large, but if you take that down to the practical, that's policy, legislation, regulation, policy blockages and lack of policy coherence that holds us back. And then we're not a modeling, we're not about data. I think a lot of us share the nation, but there is a piece of work about how do we make the information that's available on risks more accessible to those who have to make decisions on which adaptation actions to take. But really, within that kind of broader framework of understanding structural factors, we are about understanding and translating what works on adaptation, right? So we have 4 pillars, or 3 pillars in a work package, because I didn't relabel it late last night, is activities to basically, and I'll talk about our outcomes in a minute, but to move us towards, to shift the dial to kind of advanced implementation of adaptation and our understanding of what works. So a lot of what we're doing is about building skills and partnerships. It's about bringing people together. It's about meaningful engagement on training, capacity building, consultations, designing certain outputs so that we bring the community together, right? That's a big part of what we're doing. Second part of what we're doing is really generating new knowledge to fill gaps. And so we're a real, I'll get this into the next slide, but we're a real hub and spoke model. So we're really devolved with activities in each of the 4 UK nations. And we'll be doing research that's relevant to policy and practitioners in each of those regions. And we will be doing some work with OpenClim and kind of advancing the usability of OpenClim, if any of you are sort of aware of that. Our third pillar is about kind of I think answering the questions that policymakers need answering to advance their own work in-house, so what is it that DEFRA needs to know? And they're going to work in consultation with the devolved governments and their adaptation teams on, right, these are the answers we need personally to kind of move things forward in our own governments. And we have policy labs to try and work on some of the bottlenecks that we identify in policy. And then we will have a knowledge portal hosted on We Adapt that you guys all know well. So we'll be a We Adapt microsite eventually. And so I think that's SEI, our knowledge managers, basically. And the fourth work package, which I suppose is the biggest chunk of this, the biggest kind of active chunk of the project, is that we have 600,000 in flexible funding that's going to go out in an open call for projects that want to trial transformational adaptation projects. So we'll be looking, the call will go out next year, but we'll be looking for adaptation, the doing of adaptation on the ground, and then alongside that, we'll have M&E processes to draw out the learning on what works for adaptation. So these will be kind of local projects working with community partners in partnership to kind of trial adaptation. I think key here is we're going to spend some of the funds in trying to help the broadest range of people access that. So have sandpits for the people who don't have the links with universities already, have capacity building in the UK grant system kind of idea. But really we want to, where there's kind of projects in the pipeline that haven't got funded, can we fund them to start saying, okay, like, let's see what works and let's measure it while it's happening. We are about building a UK-wide adaptation community. And I was saying this morning, like, even if I don't achieve any of the things I've told DEFRA that I'm going to achieve, I think we're already going some way to building a UK-wide adaptation community, and that in itself will be of great benefit. And we're really about learning as we go and sharing between each of the devolved through the next 3-year process. But in each of the spokes, we've got an academic partner and a knowledge exchange partner. So we're working with SNIFR in Scotland, Climate Northern Ireland in Belfast. That's where I am now. And we've got the London Climate Ready Partnership and Sustainability West Midlands in Wales, in England. And in Wales, there isn't we're working with the Future Generations Commissioner, their office, the Southern Estuary Partnership in Cardiff. And then we sort of have SEI managing our data, and we're doing some work with climate outreach to kind of get a sense of public perceptions. But really, we're not a public-facing organisation. We're here to help organisations, governments, and the public sector really adapt, and private sector. But I don't think our audience isn't really the general public, but we're having discussions about that. Yep, and then there's a secretariat in London, which we try and play down. Just final slide. So we've only got 3 years, and I think I'm already over-promising, but I think there's 2 things we'd really like to do. We'd like to advance adaptation. We'd really like things to move forward, like things to be happening that wouldn't have been happening otherwise. We want to shift the dial in that sense. We would like to see, obviously we'll produce synthesis and information that actually helps people adapt, and we'd like to see and that's kind of those place-based pathways. Can we develop climate resilient development pathways, and can we think about the overall learning of how to do transformational adaptation, but also that we've done something as well. People have actually done some adaptation because of us. But I think in general what we're really looking for is a shift in the way that we talk about adaptation and the way we conceptualize adaptation beyond business as usual, towards this kind of just delivery, equity, vulnerability is central to everything that we do on adaptation. And I think we've got 3 years, and hopefully we're working towards what will happen after those 3 years. But it's, even if we do finish after 3 years, it's about having that in the second circle there, that shared UK-wide vision, strategies and priorities for what we need to do moving forward. So there's kind of that element. So there's that kind of shifting the discourse towards vulnerability focused approaches, but also this kind of, okay, we know where we are and we know what we need to do now to achieve a well-adapted UK that's much more, I would say, aspirational. But I'll leave it there, and I'm going to pass to Stephen now, who has a request.
Yeah, I'm going to talk through Helen's computer, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Just put your hands up. I don't need all cameras on me, no, absolutely not. Thank you very much, folks. Very, very quickly from me. So I'm not an academic, but I have been told that I thought too much like one for this slide. So it's very busy. We're going to simplify this and send it around with Peter and Candice, if that's okay. But the overall ask is twofold. So this is the very first activity at the Hub, and to, I suppose, lay down a baseline. It's actually linked to some of the questions that you very kindly helped us answer through the Menti this morning as well, and we continue the conversation. So one of them is on levers of change. So we want to understand through the hub over the 3 years, what are some of the main levers of change that we'd actually be trying to move? Who owns those levers of change? What are the barriers and opportunities associated with those? So that happens at a range of levels. You can feel free to forward on anything that relates to UK-wide, progress, issues, levers of change there, and also anything related to maybe more of a sectoral approach. So that as relates to the CCC adaptation monitoring framework sectors as well. But then we're really interested in, as Helen said there, this kind of regionally specific natures of levers of change as well. So, is there anything that we can find in either academic literature or non-academic grey literature that would let us know, about those levers of change as relates to leadership, kind of legislative, structural, regulatory changes that need to happen. We are aware of the CCC progress reports already and things like that. So it's not that we're starting from nowhere, but it's send us through whatever, and we can kind of sift on your behalf. We're grateful for anything you could send across. Anything related to specific geographical issues as well. Particular areas of vulnerability, maybe in each UK region, any nuance in relation to different social issues across the regions as well. Any particular financial arrangements that would need to change or are kind of waiting to be tapped would be great as well, and anything specific on data or evidence. In Northern Ireland, for example, the evidence really isn't brilliant, so we'll have a few things to contribute as regards that. Long story short, really, in terms of what we're looking for, we'll take anything you can give us at the moment. It'd be great if it's publicly available. As I say, we're open to non-academic information as well as academic. And that would be brilliant. The second research question then is something we also have begun to discuss in the meeting here, and that's on transformational adaptation. So can you help us kind of define that for use through the hub? Again, there are lots of definitions out there, and we've seen through the Menti that the elements around time, around the scale of change, around the vulnerability focus, lots of layers to this. How would we put that into practice? I suppose that's what we're trying to work out through this first activity. What could you say about one case study versus another with regards to what the transformational elements were or could have been? What would have needed to change between one case study to another to make it transformational? So we're taking global literature on this one. The previous one's just really UK based. So anything from anywhere in the world you can give us from the last 10 years on transformational adaptation would be much appreciated. So busy slide. Hopefully that's a bit clearer since I've talked through it. And next couple of weeks will be brilliant. If you could circulate to anybody who you think would have some information, my email's on the slide there, and I'll put it in the chat as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And I think that's it from us, so I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thanks ever so much for that, Helen. Really good to get that overview of what the hub's all about, and even that call for evidence. That's really great for us to know about that. And we can certainly circulate the information to the community and through our wider networks as well. Can I just check, are you looking alongside the evidence, sort of a bit of a narrative around that as well, or are you just happy to receive evidence as it is?
Both. I think at this point we'll take what we can, because the initial there's a number of different elements to the first activity. Some of it is initially sweeping information, which is then analysed through a rapid assessment. But then we're going to be going through and doing thematic analysis, interviews, etc., to try and sense check some of that. So very open to learning around that at this stage as well. So sources or any ideas, just send them my way.
Hey, brilliant. And thanks for the opportunity for this community to feed into that. I think many will take that opportunity up. So I'm going to open the floor up for any questions to Helen or Stephen. So do raise your hands if you'd like to raise anything about the MAC Hub. We have about 20 minutes to half an hour before we go into the breakout sessions. Well, as people warm up their questions, I did have one I wanted to ask you is, Yulisine, thanks so much for those questions that we set to the group at the beginning of the conversation. And as you see, one of the main challenges that was highlighted around adaptation is finance. I mean, someone put money. I wondered if you had any thoughts. You were talking about the impact and the legacy of the hub. If you had any thoughts around, the resourcing and the funding for adaptation, and how the hub hopes to contribute to that in some way.
I'm not going to come to your meetings if you ask me hard questions, Candice. You're meant to ask me easy ones. No, for me, it's about creating something that doesn't keep shutting down to have to be restarted, which is what we keep experiencing in adaptation, right? So that's what I'm focusing on, is how do we make something that doesn't disappear when project funding ends? And I suppose that kind of answers your question too, because if there's a permanent institution, it may have more or less resource, but it's still carrying on. And that's more what I'm focusing on. I think we are a knowledge, we're a knowledge exchange organization, right? So we're not about creating finance, but what we are about doing is creating the business case for adaptation and creating the business case for transformational adaptation. So vulnerability justice focused adaptation. I think they're the two ways that we can contribute to kind of making the case that money needs to go into adaptation, right?
Right. Well, good question. Good answer to a hard question. So thanks, Helen. Peter, you're first on my screen with your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Stephen. I was really interested to see the wording of creating the enabling conditions for adaptation. And again, as I mentioned in the Mentimeter in this group before, we've talked about systems change, tipping points, things like that, and the idea of focusing on creating conditions from which what we want to emerge can emerge, and slightly liberating ourselves from a kind of a linear traditional method of thinking about impact. And so I'm kind of really interested in how you see in practice you will balance that quite non-linear systemic approach of focusing on condition creation and at the same time having pressure for kind of tangible outputs that you can count and measure, but acknowledging that those might not necessarily be the enabling conditions for that transformation. And yeah, I'd just love to hear a bit more about any thoughts on how you plan to navigate that.
Yeah, no, it's such a good question. I think the hub probably it's got two sides. And I think there's the side where we look up to creating those enabling conditions. I would say we're not linking them together as yet. I think we will in the future, but I can't give you a good answer on that right now. So I think the work that we're doing with DEFRA, with the devolved governments in terms of being there to support in changing the enabling conditions within government, so that policymakers can do their, because obviously everyone in the adaptation teams in government wants to do their work well. So I think that's where we work on the structural. I think we work on the structural through the work that we're doing on systems thinking and changing the way even through, for example, the website that we'll have. So guys, we will have a knowledge portal. We don't have an online web presence yet, but we will by the end of the year, she promises. Even the way you give and present information on a portal, you can encourage systems thinking, and we're actually going to be doing training workshops on systems thinking, right? So I think that's the other, so for leadership, for example, leadership training on systems thinking. So various elements where we're going in that side. I think the flexible fund then works on the doing, okay, this is the practical, how do you adapt to floodwater, how do you adapt to heat? But because of that focus on transformational, that is also then affecting the structures. So for me, if transformational adaptation is about shifting power, even if we are implementing SUDS, right, like in a school, there will have to be an element of how is that then engaging more with the council, or engaging more with higher level government structures, which is then leading to that wider structural change through the local. So, I mean, that's the kind of academic background I come from, where the transformational change happens from the bottom up. And so that's how we deal with the structural issues as well. But it's a good question. And I think at the moment it's a bit bifurcated within the grant.
Thank you. It's really useful.
Cara, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Right?
Yes.
Good, terrible internet. Thank you very much. Really fascinating to see all of this, and your presentation was very insightful. But I have some hard questions to ask, in my opinion, about how do we make sure we get the right people inspired and active? Because I'm from Somerset Council, a community that's very heavily affected by flooding. Adaptation is far, far away from being implemented in any meaningful way, except some that has been led, I suppose, by farmers and landowners. But again, it's very heavy engineered solutions, which in my opinion isn't going to cut the biscuit. Just made that back term. And we've also had wonderful kind of case study examples being brought over from Holland, and embedding it with some form of sort of art and expressionism. So that was fascinating. But again, council members didn't engage. And I thought, what a missed opportunity. So in short, rather than rambling on, which I do often, I apologise, is how do we make sure that we inspire and engage with people who can make those decisions at a time as well, to note that we're in some councils are and government in a huge financial crisis, which is knocking a lot of these much needed actions out of the park. And we're losing a lot of staff with the knowledge and passion that would help to kind of drive that forward. What would your recommendations or solutions be?
We've only been going a little while, so I don't have many. I think I think this is the crux of it, and I think this is the point where it's about us making the case for it. And I think that's the only way that we will I mean, for example, we're a national hub, 3 years, 5 million, it's not that much money, right? So we're not, I think your question is really interesting, because it makes me think about how granular can we go, right? In terms of the people that we're able to impact. So like individual farmers that, probably not. But I think what we can do is make the business case for adaptation stronger. And that's really key for us, is like, how do we make sure we show that this stuff is worth funding, not as a cost, but as an opportunity, right? That the adaptation isn't a cost. And I think that's one of the big things that we have to do through this hub, is evidence that, so that then there is the justification for people to at least fund those roles. I think we're doing a little bit of work on communicating on adaptation. So, I mean, you guys all know Climate Outreach, who are involved, and they're going to do some work for us on using their Britain Talks Climate segments of society to look at how they play out for adaptation communication. And I think that'll be useful, because once we'll have that early on, and then we can use that throughout the hub in our engagement. I think in England, in terms of our engagement, we're working with Sustainability West Midlands, and so basically the hub is working through the existing relationships with Sustainability West Midlands and the London Climate Ready Partnership. But we've got the problem in England that there's a huge population, right? And so I think it's also, your question makes me think about, how do we make sure, I mean, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales are smaller, with smaller communities. How does the hub manage to engage effectively across England, I think, is a challenge that I've not bottomed out yet. And I think it's through networks like this that we can help promulgate. But I mean, that's the answer I have to that question.
I guess just on that note about cost, I think there's an important narrative to have around, okay, we need to it's important we fund this, but look at the cost it's going to cause if we don't invest in adaptation, which is going to be even greater, as well as noting the co-benefits that we can bring by putting adaptation into our communities, led in that kind of collaboration, which is really needed. But I guess when you're in councils that are at the point of complete breakdown, annihilation, how do we navigate that to kind of include them, but make sure we've got all the other movers and shakers and communities that can help move this forward at a time when perhaps the kind of political leadership isn't strong?
Thanks for that. Isabel?
Thank you very much. And Helen, thank you very much for your work. It's really encouraging to hear what you're doing. So I'm part of an NGO in South Devon, and we've been working for climate adaptation here locally for about 7 years now. We're very fortunate at the moment to have a sympathetic district council and also county council. A lot of our work is grassroots. We are preparing communities to become first responders, which is how we kind of talk about it. So my question really is, how do we depoliticize this whole issue of climate adaptation? Because some of the stop-start problems that we've been experiencing are related to politics at local level and national level. So I wondered if you've got any thoughts on that.
Through science? I mean, that would be as an academic, we'll do a bit of science diplomacy, and I think I don't know. No, it's not that easy. I don't have the answers, and I won't pretend to on that. I think that's really local scale. yeah, the local politics of adaptation, which is really where adaptation really happens. I think it would be nice. Actually, I do have an answer on that. I think the flexible funding that will take place at that local level can start to draw out through the monitoring and evaluation. And by monitoring and evaluation, I don't mean like everyone's going to fill out an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, we will do a reflexive process where as people are doing adaptation, they reflect on what's working, what's not, for example, through video diaries and things like that. I think maybe we can start to come at some of these tensions that prevent adaptation happening at the local level. So actually, we will be, I don't have an answer now, but I think politics is what stops transformational adaptation and what drives transformational adaptation. So it will be a key part of the research we're doing. Oh yeah, Stephen, come in. Yeah.
Just one thing. I mean, if there are any examples of the work that each of you are doing and local authorities, it sometimes is harder to get across, all the different local authorities and NGOs and community groups, etc. Please forward on anything that that we could use in this initial call for evidence. If it isn't used through the first activity, I guarantee that someone will look at it for some of the other activities. So this is a first call. It's of course we will have the email inboxes open for sending on anything else, but it'd be really great if you could send through anything that you can think of at the moment based on your current work, case studies, etc. It would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. We're at the early stages. I mean, I hope ask us again in 3 years, and hopefully we'll have a different answer.
Great, thanks for that. RG, I can only see RG. RG, your hand up. Did you want to come in with a question? Okay, well, while we wait for RG, there are a couple of comments in the chat.
Sorry, I'm here now. Did you just call my name, Rebecca?
I called RG, not sure who.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Oh, right, that's me. That is me. I'm so sorry. It's not a work day for me, so I'm afraid I'm at large and there's a bit of noise. Sorry about that, but I did very much want to join the session, so thanks for your patience. That was a really, really valuable outline of the work that the Hub's going to do. I guess the question in my mind is, given the events of this year and the previous year, is there a starting frame for the magnitude of risk? And I guess I'm thinking not just of the kind of primary risks, but the second and third order risks and cascade effects and kind of just the magnitude of the scale of the challenge. Because I think, I've worked on climate change for 20 years and in the main, I've generally been out in front with my worry when other people have been feeling calm. But I think I'm not sure I had the imagination to realise how quickly things would move. So I guess I'm interested in where the Hub starts with the magnitude of the risk.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think we've had some discussions around like framing, actually with Stephen, around the kind of the framing of the climate problem. I think my easy answer is that we're focused on the doing, right? So in some senses, my role is, right, I think two things. One, the fact that we're focusing on transformational adaptation, not incremental, is that we're acknowledging that climate change is going to change everything that we know and business as usual is no longer happening. So I think it's implicit in the framing. It's not explicit yet, but it's implicit in the framing that climate change is changing everything and we have to change the way we do things in a way that's commensurate with that. And actually we will start to, you've got all the questions, but we are preparing a kind of position piece and a paper on transformational adaptation in the UK that we can share. I think I personally come from the perspective that we really just have to focus on the potential of the positive, the world that's possible if we deal with the social problems that cause a lot of the issues. And I'm much more inclined towards a positive narrative of doing and change and positive change. And I think that's where a lot of my approach to the Hub has come. I get turned off a bit by high level, high-end climate change and hill events, high impact, low likelihood event kind of narratives around climate change, where I think social issues are what drive vulnerability, and that's where I want the action to be. And I think that's where we on the Hub want the action to be, is focusing on the most vulnerable and reducing their vulnerability, acknowledging the need, and implicit within that is the scale of the challenge, but not addressing it maybe as directly as you're talking about. Do you want to come in?
No, I was going to say, it depends probably also on the audience and how we would raise it. So I think in some of the workshops, it probably would be well suited to think about the magnitude side of things. But that's one of the things that we could probably explore is how those narratives work as well. You know, what gives people agency, and I think we are quite keen with the everything we do. We're going to try and build in that mental health focus to really understand and get ahead of the kinds of questions that people would be answering. So if we do talk about the high end, low likelihood events and things like that, something that would really change focus, trying to contextualize that and build in agency for the kinds of discussions that we are having, and that kind of positive vision of shaping the future at the same time. And so it's contextualized. It's not the only thing that folks get in a workshop, for example. So take your point. I think there's a lot. I think it's something that we probably will be working right the way through the 3 years to understand better and beyond. But yeah, it has been discussed. But I think that positive framing is really useful. So just to
and I think that's something that the climate outreach work will bottom out as well, right? Like what type of, like Stephen's saying, what type of narrative resonates, you know, and creates action.
Great. I think that's, yeah, the narrative, the framing of going to be really, really important with all of this work going forward. We've got no more hands up, but there've been a couple of sorry, Helen, did you want to come back?
No, I just wanted to reiterate Stephen's point, is that like we're not pretending I mean, Stephen's an expert, but we want to hear from you guys, right? So I think this call, we need to get your learning in the spaces that you're working in, to inform the work that we do moving forward. Like we're not like in this, I mean, we have an agenda, of course we have an agenda, but we really want to collect best practice, collect challenges, barriers, so that we can start to synthesize those and kind of raise them up, right? So they can start to be addressed. So I just want to kind of double down on that and say, like, send us what you know and tell us what you know, and so that we can start to build on that. It's not like we've got the answers, you know. We want you to tell us what the answers, not what the answers are, but like what the problems are, so we can move forward.
Yeah, no, I think certainly people will be signing up to your mailing list, and we'll be in touch with that type of evidence. And I just wanted to turn to a few comments in the chat, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so I'm very happy to read out the questions. But Craig Dunn, you had an interesting question there around mitigation and adaptation. Did you want to come back on that if you're still on the call?
Yeah, I'm still here. I was getting I was getting involved in what Helen and Stephen was saying and trying to think through their words there. But yeah, I've summed it up in the chat there. I was just wondering if what you think about the statement that I heard this week that mitigation should be legislation. The impetus should come from legislation, and the adaptation should be community led.
Where did that come from? Where have you heard that? When did it come out?
I was in a separate call. It wasn't like an announcement or anything like that.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, I missed that one. Okay, yeah. I wouldn't agree with that. No, I think adaptation has to be at all scales, does it not? And I think one of the problems that's plagued adaptation is its place specificity that's kind of sometimes prevented larger scale adaptation and legislation. No, I think one of the things that we should be pushing for as the hub is legislation on adaptation to make sure it happens. Would be my personal. Stephen, do you want to come in? We're tag teaming this.
No, I think I broadly agree. I think one of the things, you know, you can see in the complexity there of even the lenses that we're looking at in the first activity. There's an awful lot of things that in each of those levels there will be slightly different things. So what we're going to try and do is understand what's good enough, what will actually move things forward in a priority way. Local government, we've been kind of clear going into it, is a huge untapped lever. A lot of really good people who know their local areas back to front, who have all these other, you know, levers, the biodiversity levers and the housing and all these other things. They can be really like engine rooms for change. So just empowering, I suppose, people who clearly have the will and the know-how to go forward. I think that would be a really good thing, even if we can just set up some of that work in the 3 years. And then, you know, I suppose Helen said, we're not necessarily through the work of the hub itself focusing directly on public at large. Flexible fund then probably is the main place where we would start to bring some of that learning, some of the ideas that are generated through organizations and that kind of thing, to then see what communities make of it and work with them to then improve the second half of the hub and how we kind of move forward in terms of thinking about the systems, training and all that kind of stuff too. So I hope that makes sense. I'm not sure I directly answered your question, Craig, but yeah.
If I could have just a quick follow-up to that, I'm wondering in the same vein, what are your plans then? Because obviously the MAC Hub is co-funded by DEFRA. What are your plans for taking some of those learnings back to the co-funders and back to government departments?
Yeah, I don't think we're not even that separate from DEFRA, really. We kind of are, and we are, because we can slag off DEFRA, and I've already asked them if we can, and we can. But everything we do will feed directly to, we're not arm's length at all. You know, we work with them, we talk with them a lot, and everything is directly going into how they're and shaping their thinking. I think for us, it's about ensuring that we're producing outputs that they can take up. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is like recommendations and actions and things that fit with the CCRA framing and the risk owners, and fit with, you know, how they start to think about, you know, the next national adaptation program. But we're in constant dialogue with them, so I'm not too worried about that bit, because we're doing this work for them, with them, really. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and it's not a straightforward question. I mean, I guess it's not a fair question because you're at the early stages of the process, but you know, how confident are you that what you will learn from the hub, you know, let's assume worst case scenario, the hub doesn't carry on beyond the next 3 years, or how confident are you that the legacy of the hub will mean some of the outputs and outcomes from the work that you've been doing will be taken up and will take forward that legacy from DEFRA and others?
I'm pretty confident, Candy, so I won't lie. I don't see why not. I think there's the within the I think somebody put it in the chat, or maybe I'm just reinterpreting the chat, but I think the issue is you've got adaptation teams within the government, and then you've got other departments in government that need to be acting, that perhaps aren't taking adaptation as seriously as DEFRA is, right? And I think that's maybe where that's what you're pointing to, is that, yeah, DEFRA's on side, DEFRA bought in, you know, DEFRA want this knowledge to write better adaptation plans, you know, fine. But do we have the Department for Transport? Do we have the Department for Education? Have we got the MOD on board? You know, all those things that I think, but I also think we're sort of doing it in the framework of the CCRA and the risk owners of the CCRA again. So the risk owners are keen to now understand how to reduce the risks that the Treasury, that they're responsible for. So I think, actually, funnily enough, we just did an exercise. So we're developing our M&E framework, and we just did, I can't remember the name for it. Basically, we went through an exercise with DEFRA about what would things look like if we didn't have the hub, right? In order to figure out what change the hub can actually execute. And I think for us, it's about supporting DEFRA. And that's what I think the policy response unit is about supporting DEFRA in their work within government and the devolves with the rest of the government departments. So I'm fairly confident, because I think it's being driven by them, that they want what we give them. But I think it's about I think it all comes down, like you guys have said, to money and resource, and making the business case for adaptation, really.
Yeah, well, I think that everyone on the call will be really, I think we need someone who's got that high level of confidence that this work can be taken up and can be taken seriously. And I know you're not taking a sectoral approach to the work of the hub, but you've nailed on the head there by saying, you know, you need those other government departments around the table. So you have your work cut out for you. But I think, yeah, that from what you've outlined with your pillars and your plan, you know, you have a strong plan in place to start addressing some of those challenges that certainly are evident in the work you've done and have been highlighted within this network.
I think, yeah, I just think it's a way to get, you know, the frustrations, we can start to turn them into solutions a bit. And I think it's just about, yeah, like anything that we do will be more than not having done anything, right? And I think I want to use this as an opportunity to raise as many voices as I can, right? And synthesize it and take it up. But I also think, I think for me, there has to be, while everybody's getting on with the activities now, I mean, for me, it's about, how can we create something permanent out of this? And how can we use the hub and the hub's networks? And that's why I want, you know, it's got to be a network of networks, right? It's got to bring together all these people who've been working on adaptation in their silos or in their little individual, like fighting the good fight on their own, right? How can we bring that all to sort of fight for change, but also just to create something permanent? That's my worry now, is how can we really create something that doesn't keep disappearing, and we don't have to collect the vestiges of the people who've been working on it to try and pick ourselves up and start again. And so that to me will be the biggest change. If I can do that, then I'll be happy, you know, because obviously we're not going to solve adaptation in the next 3 years, and you know, nobody thinks we can do that, right?
No, I think that's really positive to hear. And I think from your experience of working in Cabinet Office, you've probably got that experience firsthand of people and teams and working groups being set up to then just be dropped later on. So I think that long-term longevity is definitely key. I'm just conscious of time, and before we sort of go into our breakout sessions, there are a couple more questions in the chat. Again, Kate Donovan, you had a really interesting question there. I don't know if you're still on the call and you wanted to just come in and ask your question.
Hi everybody. Kate Donovan from the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. I've been putting things in the chat because I can't find my hand raising button, which is just classic, isn't it? Sorry. But yeah, lovely to have this conversation. Lovely to join this community. I don't know which question was interesting, but I'll go with my last one. And there's lots more, because the other things for people to be aware of is in COP29 recently, transformational adaptation didn't go down very well, which I think is really interesting. I'd love to have a separate conversation about why that is, why it was being pushed, if you like. But no, I was just thinking DEFRA has really been involved in this research funding, the hub, and also the research projects that come along with it. Working in Scotland, we're very aware that we have to work across multiple departments to get change. And I guess some of us are getting a little bit concerned that it's becoming a DEFRA work package rather than actually a research programme. So I think there's a need to be separate from DEFRA as well as working with them. But I'm just wondering, what can we do to kind of instigate this radical change that we need across departments? And similar to Candice's point around, you know, who is the key policymaker that we're targeting here? How are we going to get that change over the next few years? Because it's a very long process, as you are very aware, Helen. And so I'd love to hear your take. I think DEFRA's influence on this research programme has been particularly interesting.
Yeah, I think it's such a good question. I think we are separate. I think we are. I think it's, you know, and I asked that actually, like, am I a mouthpiece for you, or can, you know, and I can critique and we can provide challenge. So, but it's such a good question, because DEFRA, and they'll acknowledge it themselves, nobody listens to them in government, right? They're probably like the least powerful government department. And so, yeah, I'm well aware of that. So I think it's a really good point you're raising about, but again, they are also, they're also our gatekeepers into government, right? So I can't suddenly go to Treasury or DFE or, you know, DFT or any of them. I can't go to them because I've got to go through DEFRA. But I think what they are doing is they are going out and seeking, because there are all the risks. The only way I can think about it is all the risk holders across government, and making sure that we liaise with them. But I think, and the other really key thing for me is about being devolved, right? Like, and you know, we are really, really keen. I think we're walking the talk. Is that the right thing? Yeah, we're walking the talk. Yeah, I mean, like, that's why I've come to Belfast today, right, to present to the steering group of Climate NI, right, because I think a lot of the way we can do it is to come from the devolved back in as well. But yeah, I mean, the mainstreaming adaptation across government departments question is probably older than me. So, but I think it's a really good challenge, Kate, and I'll think on it. But I think it's, yeah, do you want to come in?
Well, just, I suppose really briefly, I think it's probably something we're working on as well. So, you know, through the way that the hub has been set up is working through those regional partnerships. So, who tend to be, at least in Scotland and Northern Ireland, you know, focused and funded through central government as well. So there are loops of incentives in there that we can start to pull on a little bit. The Climate Resilience Board, obviously in the Cabinet Office, I think was listed in the application as a target. It doesn't have devolved folks sitting on it, and that's something I think that I'd like to have a big conversation around as well. But I suppose maybe just one thing to think about, or a few things, is the scale of other things that are happening while the hub is going on too. So that's something we're keen to really, you've got the whole CCRI4 piece, which is underway at the moment. and all the work that's going in there from all the kind of government departments, research institutes, etc. as well, they use this kind of risk owner, action owner targeting kind of method that we may piggyback on. So again, there'd be some consistency there in terms of how these things would be approaching some areas like that. And the Met Office obviously doing substantial work around the kind of local authority piece at the moment and the climate services as well. So there's lots of stuff there that I think we could probably use for scale and have like a series of moments as well that would go beyond DEFRA and go beyond even above the likes of the flexible fund call, etc. But important that I think the way it was set up too, and trying to make sure that the information as well has longevity, that it's being hosted primarily on We Adapt and the site, so it's not setting up something different as well. So hopefully that also allows for that kind of longer form thing. Yeah,
I think you're right, Kate. It's about, and I think that's something I'm really keen to. We were talking about this earlier. Is like, what are the key policy windows and levers that we have that we need to be targeting? And I don't at the moment. I don't know whether I'll ever get a list with dates, which is what I'd love, right? But like, I don't think I'll ever get that. But maybe a slightly more amorphous. Okay, these are the key moments, and these are the key. So, for example, I think like like the whole resilience piece in government, right? Like but then again, DEFRA talks to the resilience team in Cabinet Office. So again, but yeah, it's about how do we feed into some of those processes that are sometimes happen in a bit in parallel, but maybe have a bit more teeth because of the kind of immediacy of them. But yeah, I think it's a good question that we'll keep. I think it comes back to the fact that my main goal is to provide information on how to do adaptation. And I think even if we meet that, you know what I mean? It's like you would collect evidence on how to do adaptation. There's not that much evidence to collect, right? So I think even if we build a body of evidence on adaptation, I'm happy with that. Like I could sleep at night if that's what my contribution had been, right? And I think the rest is, okay, I've got ambition to like maybe have a bit more influence in how policy is made or whatever. But yeah, even if we do that, even if we bring the UK adaptation community a little bit together, even if more people are talking to each other, if we're learning from each other and we develop an evidence base on what works in an equitable way, I'd be happy.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Helen.
Great. Thanks for that. I just want to give anyone an opportunity, anyone who's not been able to raise their hand, if you have a quick question for Helen or Stephen, please feel free to take off your mic. Yes, Cindy, I see a real hand being raised.
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be in this room. I followed a link and somehow I seem to be on the main screen as opposed to a member of the audience, but that's not my question. Helen, Stephen, I wondered if you'd been introduced to Peers for the Planet, because I think that might be a really interesting key in for you, because they look at policy through the second chamber, and they keep their heads under the radar, obviously, because unfortunately, adaptation and climate awareness is political. And but I could, if you want, make an introduction. They look at every single bit of policy going through government in order to give it a climate or adaptation lean. And they have Lord Debon as part of it. And I think it might be a really good way for you to strategize about something longer term, having longer term impact and being able to feed into information. So I'll put my email here and maybe one of you can reach out to me and I'll make the introduction.
That would be amazing. Thank you. Yeah, sounds excellent.
Great. We've got time.
He needs something to do now that he's retired. Sorry, my laptop's running out of battery, so I might faff around for a bit.
Lee, I'll let you have the final question.
Yeah, hi, thanks everyone. Just a question for Stephen. My project is with Neil Adger and Kat Butler, various other universities around the UK, looking at community-led adaptation in one case in Loch Hen in Scotland, one case in Leeds urban area. Is this the kind of evidence you're looking for? And because I've got an abstract accepted that I've got to write a short, like 1,000 to 3,000 word piece for a conference next year, and I'm doing that over the Christmas period. Is this what you're interested in, Stephen? And if so, I will be in touch.
Sorry, you're on mute, Stephen.
Go for it.
Apologies. this is work that you've completed that you're now writing up. Is that correct? Or
no, we're in the middle of it. We've started it. We've done the interviews are ongoing, and the kind of interaction with the community organisations is ongoing. The project runs until August next year. So yeah, we've kind of we're already and we're applying. We're in the midst of applying for funding for a phase 2, which would go more in depth into the cases, which would start next September, I believe, if the bid's successful. But yeah, we're aiming to gather all the data by January next year, early next year, and then start and then kind of bring it all together. So I don't know when something would be initial bit of evidence could be released. I don't know how.
well, look, if you didn't mind, I mean, if you forward on whatever you have at the moment, and we are going to be doing a series of interviews and things like that through the hub as well. So at the very least, I'm sure we can pick it up with you and kind of have a chat through and get some feedback in that way. So yeah, very open to that, Lee. If you'd get in touch, that'd be great.
And I think one of the things we'll create through the We Adapt, I mean, that's what We Adapt is about, right? Sharing best practice that people have done. So I think We Adapt still remains a way to share case study examples with others. And I think we'll develop a way to link that with the MAC Hub. So I think I think it's not available yet, but there will be a mechanism through which people can submit case studies, continuously to add to the body of evidence that's on the website.
Okay, well, I'll get back to the rest of my team, and we'll see what we can put together and then get in touch. I've got your email, Stephen, so I'll go through that. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll put it back in the chat just in case anybody hasn't seen it further back. But yeah, that'd be great, Lee. Thank you for that.
Great.